Here are the fantasy follows, players to get into your lineup and players that are best left on your bench. The starts and sits for week 4 of fantasy football. Starting with the quarterbacks. The top start is Aaron Rodgers from the Green Bay Packers, playing the Atlanta Falcons on Monday Night Football. Atlanta allowing the most fantasy points to the quarterback position. The Falcons have given up 30-plus fantasy points to the quarterback in each of their 3 games, including last week 30.84 combined to Mitchell Trubisky and Nick Foles. And they've given up a minimum of 300 yards passing in each of those 3 games. Rodgers averaging 24.59 fantasy points per game. He's thrown 9 touchdowns. That's tied for 3rd most in the league. This is a great spot on Monday night for Aaron Rodgers. The rest of the top 5. Number 2, Deshaun Watson versus the Vikings. Number 3, Joe Burrow versus Jacksonville. Number 4, Matthew Stafford from the Lions versus New Orleans. And number 5, Baker Mayfield from the Browns at Dallas. The top sit is Carson Wentz from the Philadelphia Eagles. Wentz playing on Sunday night at San Francisco, who are giving up the 6th fewest fantasy points to the quarterback spot. They have given up under 12 fantasy points the last 2 weeks and are allowing the 2nd fewest passing yards per game in the league. Now, Wentz, he's thrown 2 interceptions each game this year, and the Eagles still badly injured. No Jalen Reagor, no Dallas Goedert. Deshaun Jackson may play, but nursing an injury and not likely to see Alshon Jeffrey back. They've basically got Miles Sanders, Zach Ertz, and several people that they've brought in off the street. This is not a good spot for Carson Wentz, and that lands him at the top of the sit list. The rest of the top 5. Number 2, Phillip Rivers from the Colts at the Bears. Number 3, Kirk Cousins from the Vikings at Houston. Number 4, Nick Foles from the Bears versus the Colts. And number 5, Teddy Bridgewater from Carolina versus Arizona. At the wide receiver spot, the top start this week is Odell Beckham from the Cleveland Browns, playing at the Dallas Cowboys. Dallas giving up the 2nd most fantasy points to the wide receiver position. Now, they have allowed 29.9 fantasy points to Calvin Ridley in week 2 and 37.0 to Tyler Lockett in week 3. 7 touchdowns allowed to wide receivers this year. Now, Beckham, he has certainly been up and down to say the least during his time in Cleveland, but this week is a great time for him to shine, and he is the top start of the week. The rest of the top 5. Number 2, Allen Lazard from the Green Bay Packers versus Atlanta. Number 3, Will Fuller from the Houston Texans versus the Vikings. Number 4, Michael Gallup from the Cowboys against the Browns. And number 5, Tyler Boyd from the Cincinnati Bengals versus the Jacksonville Jaguars. The top sit is Marquise Hollywood Brown from the Baltimore Ravens, playing at Washington, who are allowing the 6th fewest fantasy points to the wide receiver position. They have allowed only 1 wide receiver over 10 fantasy points this year and are allowing the 5th fewest passing yards in the league. Now, Brown has seen 6 targets each game, but he has seen his fantasy totals go down 15 to 10 to 3. Only 2 catches last week versus Kansas City. I think this is a tough spot for Marquise Brown. The big play player is going to be the top sit this week. The rest of the top 5, number 2, Adam Thielen from the Vikings at Houston. Number 3, Anthony Miller from the Bears versus Indianapolis. Number 4, T.Y. Hilton from the Colts at the Bears. And number 5, Deshaun Jackson from Philadelphia playing at the 49ers. The starts and sits for week 4 at the running back spot. The top start is David Johnson from the Houston Texans, playing against the Minnesota Vikings, who are allowing the 8th most fantasy points to the running back position. They are also allowing the 7th most rushing yards in the league. Now, the best news for David Johnson and the rest of the Texans is this week they are not playing Kansas City, Baltimore, or Pittsburgh. And it's likely there's not going to be Duke Johnson for the Texans this week. So that means David Johnson has the backfield to himself. I think this is the first week where he has a really nice game since coming to Houston. The rest of the top 5. Number 2, Kenyon Drake from Arizona playing at Carolina. Number 3, James Robinson from Jacksonville playing at Cincinnati. Number 4, Mike Davis for the Panthers versus the Cardinals. And number 5, Melvin Gordon in the Thursday night game for the Broncos at the Jets. The top sit is David Montgomery for the Chicago Bears, playing against the Indianapolis Colts, who are allowing the 6th fewest fantasy points to the running back spot. Now, they are also allowing the 4th fewest rushing yards in the league. Montgomery, last week, 7.4 fantasy points at Atlanta. And I feel that this game is not going to be a lot of points on either side. That makes Montgomery the top sit. The rest of the top 5. Number 2, Myles Gaskin for the Dolphins versus Seattle. Number 3, Antonio Gibson for Washington versus Baltimore. Number 4, Leonard Fournette for the Bucs versus the Chargers. And number 5, Devonta Freeman for the Giants at the LA Rams. And at the tight end spot, the top start is TJ Hockenson from the Detroit Lions versus the New Orleans Saints. Second week in a row on this list for Hockenson, but last week he was the top sit, so this is a worst to first situation. In fact, New Orleans, the first most fantasy points allowed to the tight end spot. They allowed 13.6 to O.J. Howard in week 1, 28.5 to Darren Waller in week 2, and Robert Tonyan. Who? Robert Tonyan for the Green Bay Packers last week, 16.0. 4 total touchdowns to tight ends this year. Now, Hockenson, he's averaged just over 5 targets per game, but only 1 touchdown so far this year. A good chance that changes this week. The rest of the top 5. Number 2, Mark Andrews from the Ravens at Washington. Number 3, Dalton Schultz from the Cowboys versus Cleveland. Number 4, Darren Waller from Las Vegas versus the Bills. And number 5, Zach Ertz from Philadelphia at the 49ers. The top sit is Tyler Higbee versus the New York Giants. The Giants allowing the 5th fewest fantasy points to the tight end position. Now, Higbee has had a decent season, but last week at Buffalo, just 2 targets. And this week is another tricky matchup. That makes him the top sit. The rest of the top 5. Number 2, Hayden Hurst from the Falcons at Green Bay. Number 3, Greg Olsen from Seattle at the Dolphins. Number 4, Austin Hooper for the Browns at Dallas. And number 5, Hunter Henry from the Chargers at the Bucs. For more on this week's starts and sits, be sure to join us Sunday for the TFF Live Sunday pregame show at 12 noon. We're with you every Sunday right up until game time to get you ready for your fantasy matchups. And here's how you can find us. We are the Fantasy Follow. We are a brand new channel. Thank you for seeing our video here on YouTube. Please subscribe now, like, share, and comment below. Let us know if there are any players you think should be on these lists. We have a goal of 100 subscribers by week 7, so please subscribe and help us reach our goal. On Twitter, at the Fantasy Follow, fantasy spelled FNTSY. And don't forget you can submit your lineup questions on Twitter using the hashtag AskTFFLive, and we'll answer those questions on the air on Sunday. On Facebook, /The Fantasy Follow, and our website, thefantasyfollow.com.